The next menu that we'll talk about is the Calibration menu. Press F3 to enter it. In the Calibration menu, you can do a number of things. The most common is to adjust hardware settings. For instance, you can zero your flow meter, or if you go down and highlight IRGA and press F1, you can see you could also zero and span your IRGA, or you can calibrate your mixer, or finally, you could calibrate your LED light source. For now, go ahead and go to the top menu, which is viewing your current settings. And I'd like you to first view your current settings. You can view what your factory settings are if you move the cursor down to factory and press F1. It will show you again what your serial number was, when it was last here for calibration, and you can see some of the settings that were adjusted while it was here. If you expand CO2, it will actually show you the coefficients that are used for your polynomial to compute CO2. And the same is true for water. In addition, it will show you what your flow meter 0 was and what the parameters are for your pressure sensor. All of this is interesting, but most of the time you will be using and making adjustments in the user settings. If you expand that, you'll see what are some of the settings that you'll be adjusting. The first item is your flow 0. The second is your IRGA 0, and that's for CO2 or water. The next is IRGA span, and again, that's for CO2 or water. And finally, you will be matching your IRGA at the beginning before you start taking measurements, and periodically throughout the day, depending on the experiment. Occasionally, it will also be necessary for you to calibrate your CO2 mixer. To see a history of when these items have been adjusted, simply escape out and select View History. And if you go to the top of the screen, you may not have any items in there, or you may have a number of items in there. You can see on this particular instrument on July 16th at 9:59 in the morning, the experimenter did a CO2 mixer calibration. And if you expand that section, you'll notice what the adjustments made. If you arrow down through that list, you will see what your pump voltage is set to. And again, this is something that you don't normally adjust unless you need to get a higher maximum CO2 concentration. You'll notice this particular instrument's maximum is 2,305.76 ppm. And typically that's more than enough for most physiological experiments. However, if you were doing something specific and you needed a higher CO2 concentration than that, then you could adjust this pump voltage down to achieve a higher CO2 concentration. So you can see what the resultant ppm values were for each of the millivolt set points for the CO2 mixer. If you go and look at my next item here, which was an IRGA match, if I expand that, you can see how much CO2 sample and water sample were adjusted when I did my last match. You'll see CO2 was adjusted 2.9 ppm and water was a -1 part per thousand. If I look at my next match that was done, you'll see that they have remained largely unchanged. whereas CO2 sample was 2.9 before, now it's 3.1. And where water was a -1 before, it's still a -1. So from the first match to this next match, you can see that my adjustments were very little. So the need for this match is probably pretty small in this particular example. So this information can be really useful if you are trying to decide an experimental protocol and how often you need to match your analyzers, and even if you compare your IRGA zeros and spans, if they're not being adjusted very much each time, then perhaps you can do them less frequently. Go ahead and press Escape to leave this view, and we can go ahead and contract that menu. And that's really an overview of the calibration menu. Again, these are mostly items that you won't be doing on a daily basis, but you may be doing every week or every month. You can go ahead and press Escape to return to the open screen.